beings in a being. So today we're going to talk about randomness starting from one particular episodes in this series of movies directed by Kieslowski, the Decalogue, and in particular the a movie that focuses on the first commandment for Christians and Jews, the fact of not having other gods than God. The interpretation that Kieslowski gives of this commandment is not strictly religious. It is a more general interpretation about what happens to human beings when they start conceiving of their possibility of grasping reality, of understanding reality, of measuring and calculating reality in a way that is somehow arrogant, extreme. So the movie tells the story of a father and a son. The father and the son live in Poland, in Northern Europe. They live close to a lake that becomes, like many lakes in Northern Europe, iced in winter. And as a consequence, people, and especially children, can skate on this iced lake. They go on the lake and skate on top of it. The father is a scientist, is a physician, is a physicist, which means that he's an expert on turning reality, and especially the tangible reality, into a formula, into something that can be calculated, into sort of maths. And the lake close to the house of this physicist and his son has just turned into ice, and the son is asking his father, like, "Father, can I go on this lake and skate? Can I skate on this lake?" And the father is not actually emotionally worried with this question, but reacts to this question as a physicist. So he invents a complex formula that then gives to a computer. It was the first epoch of the computers. We are in the 80s, so computers were used more and more by scientists, especially at that time. In this case, a personal computer. So he comes up with this formula. He invents this formula, and he puts this formula in the computer with all the measurements, with all the variables, with all the criteria and standards, and all the elements that are involved in the complex calculus that is necessary to give a scientific answer to the son. And the answer, the result actually of the system, of the equation, is a positive. So the father says, "Yes, my son, you can go and skate on the ice because my physical formula, my computer have told me that the ice is thick enough. So you can go. You know, the temperature of the air, the temperature of the water, and so on and so forth are such that there are no risks." So the son goes to the lake and he starts skating, but unfortunately the ice that covers the surface of the lake breaks, and the son falls into the gelid, icy waters of the lake and drowns. He dies. And the father is, of course, desperate, because what has just happened is somehow also because of him, because of his blind faith in calculus, in measurements, in the ability to grasp reality through physics, through mathematics. And so the father starts repeating this calculus again and again, and everything is correct all the variables, all the data, all the elements, all the calculations are correct, you cannot understand why this ice on top of the lake actually broke and the sun fell into the gelid waters of the lake and died. But there is a truth to this story that is not known to the father, that is not known to calculus, and it is a truth that is not a spiritual truth, it is an empirical truth. It is a tangible truth. You see, the movie tells us that the night before the son would go to the lake and skate, reassured by the calculations of his father, something had happened. Something unpredictable, something totally banal, something that seemed not to have any consequences on the future of reality, but actually it eventually determined the death of this little child. Overnight, the night before the son would go skating on the ice, a homeless person had decided to camp just close to the lake, just close to the point where the child would have actually skated the day after. And being cold at night, this homeless person had lit a fire in order to stay a little bit warmer at the border of the lake during the night. Then in the morning, this homeless person had left. But that particular event had actually contributed to make the ice of the surface of the lake exactly in that point a little bit thinner and thinner enough so that it would then break and let this poor child fall, drown, and die. So it is, of course, a very sad story, but it's also a metaphor about the fact that we have wonderful instruments, wonderful tools, the computer, for instance, and we have wonderful frameworks, wonderful languages to grasp reality, to understand reality, to turn reality into a calculus, to mathematize the environment and then better control it. But at the same time, this movie is telling us that not everything can be controlled, not everything can be turned into a mathematical formula. There is always something that escapes calculus. Because reality is very complex. Reality is made of many different elements, and reality is also composed, in this case, by some agencies that cannot be foreseen and cannot be controlled. The agency of another human being that is actually totally independent out of this family household and decides to do something banal that nevertheless determines enormous consequences. So, talking about this movie today, which is a wonderful movie if you have an occasion to see it, to watch it, because on the one hand, the metaphorical message and also the moral message of the movie is you should actually be careful about arrogance. You should be careful about being too sure about your cognitive and intellectual capabilities. Even in the domain of science, humility, modesty is absolutely necessary. Now, this is important also because human beings do not always have this humility, do not always have this modesty, do not always restrain themselves in this natural biocognitive instinct of understanding things. What does it mean, understanding something? What does it mean, for instance, understanding the phenomenon of an iced lake that breaks and lets a little skater, a child, drown and die, means understanding how, from a certain state of the world that we name A, we pass to a state of the world that we name B, and it means also understanding what precise elements in A are such to determine this passage to B. So, in much simpler terms, understanding reality means also grasping the links between cause and effect, determining what is a cause and determining what is an effect. This logic of causation is deeply rooted in the cognition of human beings. It is so rooted that probably it has also some neurophysiological basis that derive from the natural biological evolution of the human species. Indeed, just imagine yourselves as living beings, as human beings, but without the ability to grasp links between causes in the environment that surrounds you and effects in the environments that surround you. You would actually probably not survive. You would not be able to survive in an environment in which you are not able anymore to spot the causes and to not only understand but foresee the effects, because this is probably the adaptive value of being able to master the laws of causation. If I understand very well what causes what is an effect of what, I can probably foresee the developments of reality. I can forestall even the developments of reality that are potentially a nuisance to me or even dangerous to my life for my own existence. So this is a central cognitive ability of human beings. It is a product of natural evolution. It is something that is deeply ingrained in our cognition, but it is so ingrained in our cognition that we are actually very reluctant to give it up. So when something happens in our environment, we immediately think, oh, what caused it? Oh, this situation is the effect of what other previous situations? What is causing, for instance, the pandemic? What is causing, for instance, a financial market crisis, and so on and so forth? So, in many circumstances, human beings are actually reluctant to accept randomness. What is randomness? Well, randomness is the idea that what happens in the environment doesn't have a cause, or at least this cause is so complex that cannot be actually calculated. It cannot be put into words. It cannot be understood. Exactly in the same case of this father, a physicist, who thinks that everything can be calculated as an effect of a previous situation, but without considering that something is always escaping comprehension. So this is definitely a human attitude, which becomes nevertheless extremely key for a reflection on semiotic ideologies, for a critical semiotics of ideologies of causation, because although this instinct for explaining the causes and effects of reality is actually part of our natural cognition, the specific ways in which we look for causes in the environment, in the environments in which we live, are actually determined by long-term cultural schemes that are embraced by a community of interpreters. In order to understand that, we should probably go back to Charles Sanders Peirce. You see, Charles Sanders Peirce, as you probably remember, devised an extremely complex understanding of meanings and significations. He came up with that typology, with a categorization of the different systems of science. And this categorization, you are very familiar with it, usually is communicated to students, telling them that there are symbols, there are icons, there are indexes, and that one of these signs in particular, that is indexes, signify by virtue of a physical contiguity between the representamen and the object. I'm going to give you an example now to make things more understandable. The classical index, as it was thought and conceived by Peirce, is the footprint on the sand. So you go to the beach, you go to a wonderful Chinese beach, you go to Sanaa, for instance, it's a beautiful place. And there on the strand, on the beach, you come across, you see some visual configurations that do not seem natural anymore, do not seem spontaneous anymore, do not seem emerging from sand without actually any agency, but are recognized by you as footprints. You go to the beach, you go to the strand, and you see some footprints on the sand. And immediately your mind goes to what has caused these footprints on the sand, and as a consequence is the object, invisible object, that is signified by these footprints on the ground. So you go to the beach and you see that there are some prints of paws that you recognize are prints of the paws of a dog. And then you understand that probably like 5 minutes earlier or 10 minutes earlier, a dog was passing by, walking or running along the same beach. And then if you are a very good semiotician, you will be able also to recognize from the shape of the footprints or the paw prints how big the animal was, how long ago it would pass, if it was running, it was moving slow or fast, and so on and so forth. And all the hunters, for instance, are very good at recognizing meaning patterns thanks to traces in the environment. So this is a typical symbol of index, which is one of the 3 types of signs singled out by Charles Sanders Peirce. And in general, the abstract definition of an index says that indexes, we call indexes all those signs in which the relation between the representamen and the object is a relation of physical contiguity. It is a real relation. Now, Peirce is very complicated. If you read the fragments that he has left, he had a wonderful mind, a tremendous intellect. He was very intelligent, one of the most intelligent philosophers of his generation, of the history of philosophy. At the same time, he was very unsystematic. He had a very unorderly career and personal life. So, he actually died in poverty, and had this habit to scribble his thoughts on papers in a very little systematic way. So now we have all these papers that are collected, the collected papers of Peirce. But the style of Peirce as well is very difficult. So if you read all the fragments of Peirce in the collected papers that deal with the definition of indexes, you will find many variations, because Peirce as a good philosopher, would go back again and again on the same concepts and try to define them better and better, and to go deeper and deeper in the definition of concepts and the interrelation of concepts. But if you read all these fragments, I've read everything that Peirce has written, and if you read everything that he has written on indexes, it is clear that for him, the relation between the representament, the visible part of the sign, and the object, the invisible part of the sign, is never one of direct causality. It is always a real relation, but is never a causal relation. So, from the semiotic point of view, what matters, according to Peirce, is not that the passage of the dog has physically caused the appearance of footprints, of prints of paws on the sand of the beach. This is the point of view of physics. The point of view of semiotics is that there is a real connection between the passage of the dog and the appearance of these footprints, because we see this connection, we see this relation as immediate and as determined by contiguity in space and time. So we see the object thanks to the sign, because we have in mind that the sign was produced thanks to the fact that it was in the same space and in the same time with the object. If the dog hadn't been at that precise moment and in that precise space, walking, running on the beach, the footprints would not be there. What is the difference then between causality and the semiotic understanding of it? What is the difference between spotting a relation, a physical relation between a cause and an effect, and spotting a semiotic relation between an index and its meaning? This is something fundamental. We're going to talk about it after a very short break. I'm sorry, today is going to be a lesson that will have some technical imprecisions because of the initial mistake. We should learn also the fact that we cannot control everything. Sometimes we forget something, and we apologize, of course. But these accidents happen. So we're going to have a short break of 10 minutes, and we're going to resume. We'll see whether the program speakers are there or not. Otherwise, we will continue talking about this concept of semiotic understanding of causality. So 10 minutes break and 9 minutes break, and I will resume at 10 past. Apologies once again for the delay. I see that heroically and miraculously, Professor Elsa Soro, who's one of our planned speaker of today, is already there. I apologize to her also for my mistake, because I hadn't considered the change of time. We should learn a lot from China, and one thing we should learn is that we shouldn't mess with time. You have the same time all throughout China. That is a wonderful thing, so you don't get confused. There is one time as for everybody. Europe is actually going back to that. I think in 1 or 2 years, all Europe will eliminate this change of time. The history of this change of time is also interesting, because it was introduced for industrial reasons, in order to give more light to workers in factories. But it is a typical, if I may say, probably it's good to say it to a Chinese audience, it is a typical capitalistic idea, that you can control time in order to increase production, and you create problems for people. But anyway, 8 minutes of pause, and we'll resume at 8:10. Professor Antonio Sant'Angelo is also ready, and I'll introduce the two speakers, and we'll continue this lesson. So I'll see you back at 10 past.